Hey, this is Brett, and you're watching Brett and Some Books. Today, we are starting a book called The Bosnia List. It's the memoir of war, exile, and return by Kenan Trebencevic and Susan Shapiro. This takes place in 1992, in several parts throughout, but in 1992, there was an ethnic cleansing that began in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And this is a perspective of somebody who was 11 at the time. And I would have been 6 at the time that he was speaking of. So it kind of gives me an insight to what childhood would have been like in a country where neighbors turn on neighbors. And I think it's important that we think about that kind of thing as we grow more and more divided. We need some better solutions than the animosity that we have toward our neighbors. I'm going to do a bad job of pronouncing a lot of things. When I'm in the present tense, I'll use my regular accent. I'm trying to not slaughter and disrespect people's cultures and languages while at the same time remaining authentic. So this is the prologue. Marshal Tito in Astoria, Queens, New York, December 2009. This is a recipe for disaster, Eldon said as we ordered 2 buds at the bar. My older brother eyed the closet-sized bouncer, standing at an ease by the entrance. The guy probably thinks he has the cushiest job in the world, overseeing a bunch of well-dressed, young, mild-mannered white patrons. He has no idea what he's in for. I hoped Eldon was just being paranoid. Why would anything bad happen here? I asked as we sat down in the plush leather seats. I surveyed the scene in Marshall's, an ambitious new 4,500 square foot lounge that had been opened in Astoria. We'd been invited by the owner, Gigi, a Bosnian Muslim like us. He had the romantic idea that a Balkan-themed dance club would unite all the antagonistic groups from the former Yugoslavia who were exiled in my Queens neighborhood. He mixed kitchen workers from Bosnia with waiters from Serbia, our old enemy, and Gigi chose a space right next door to the Scorpio Cafe, packed with Croatians who, in the southern part of my country, were no less culpable for what happened to my people in the 1992 war that my family barely survived. 2 cute waitresses with Serbian accents handed us menus printed in both English and Bosnian. They were dressed in white button-down shirts and black tights and had red scarves around their necks, the uniform of young communist pioneers in the area of Marshal Tito, the lounge's namesake. The salty aroma of red bean soup and smoked beef from the next table reminded me of when our mother, Adisa, stood on our balcony in Bosnia, beckoning me to lunch. In 6th grade, I'd rush home to eat between soccer and karate practice. The strudjla sa Jabukma on the tray going by us couldn't possibly be tastier than the apple strudel my mom made back before the killing started. Hey Eldon, remember when you gave me your Kapitan Miki collection? I pointed at the picture on the wall of my favorite comic book character from childhood. He used to chase Indians on a horse like John Wayne. There's a Croatian website where you can find it. Eldon was 6 years my senior, 4 inches taller, with ash blonde hair the color of Mom's. Really? Cool. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. I was surprised to hear our compatriot Dino Merlin's bittersweet ballad, Is Sarajevo Where It Once Was, on the sound system. I'd never had a chance to visit Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. On the wall behind Eldon, a framed photograph of 11 men in their 20s from the Yugoslavian national soccer team, my old heroes, caught my eye. The slim, muscular athletes with short, dark hair resembled me now. I realized it was taken in 1990, the last time Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks played on the same professional team together. As a 29-year-old single guy in jeans and sneakers who lived a few minutes away, I was comfortable there, delighted by every inch of this Tito-era lounge that glowed with ex-Yugo nostalgia. Not so my brother. Like this will make us forget the 300,000 dead. Eldon clicked his beer against mine. Gigi spotted us and came over. Ruzdia Jovic, a.k.a. Gigi, was also owned the DeWine bar as well as our local hair salon. A slim 6'4" bald guy in his 50s, he was wearing an ascot, stone-washed True Religion jeans, and suede shoes. He looked like an aging rock star. He was clearly pleased we'd taken him up on his invitation. "Hey, get these two a drink on me," he ordered the bartender. "I want you to have some rakia on the house." Gigi offered us moonshine made from plums, which tasted like liquid fire racing down my throat. "You're the nicest Bosniak guys I've ever met here," he added, using the term for native Muslims from our region. "Your father raised you boys right." I smiled, proud of my dad, Kenan Trebencevic, whose black hair and outgoing personality I'd inherited. As the prosperous and popular owner of the only fitness center in our city of Brčko, my father had been considered the unofficial mayor. Because of my surname, everyone had treated me special when I was growing up. My mother had a big job as an office manager at a clothing company. Oh, thank you for joining us, Nadia. We lived in a breezy 2-bedroom apartment with a wraparound balcony. In 1993, as the Serbs were massacring Bosniaks across my country, the 4 of us, the last Muslim family in town, fled Brčko for Connecticut. There, Dad slung fast food at Boston Chicken, painted houses, sanded yachts at a boat marina, bagged groceries at Stop and Shop, and toiled in a factory that made plastic tops for fruit cups, anything to avoid welfare. My mom took to babysitting, while Eldon earned the minimum wage as a busboy at a Mexican joint. I was 13, and my awkward, broken English had set me apart as the only Bosnian kid at Bedford Middle School in Westport. We were nobodies in our new home, and I hated feeling so invisible and insignificant. But now, after 2 decades here, I'd become a proud citizen of the United States, and I'd chosen to live in New York's most culturally diverse borough. I was a pacifist, more interested in the Yankees and Seinfeld reruns than a bloodthirsty revenge. Yet, more and more, I found myself returning to this busy avenue known as Hugo Row, gravitating toward the other 10,000 expatriates in Queens, as if it wasn't too late to recover what was lost. My brother and I ate cevapi, our favorite beef sausages, at the old bridge, run by a Sarajevan also named Kenan. I brought my prushta, or prosciutto, long strips of lamb from the Serbians behind the counter at Munkin Foods with no problem. Well, no problem once I learned that the butcher had immigrated to the U.S. 30 years ago, and thus couldn't have been a soldier armed with an AK-47 who, in 1992, took my brother and Eldon to the concentration camp. "Proximity alert, 8 o'clock, Eldon whispered to me. He'd noticed 2 pretty Bosniak sisters lingering close by. I turned around to check them out. Like us, one was light-haired, the other dark. They were overly done up, wearing dark blush and pink lipstick. The brunette had on a tight black dress and stilettos. The blonde was in a sparkly top that shimmered like a disco ball. I could tell from their accents that they came from Sarajevo. They were talking to each other in Bosnian about their jobs in the fashion business, but they kept making grammatical mistakes. They were already forgetting their past. "So where are you from?" the blonde asked us in English. "Ishbirkov." I answered in Bosnian. But now do you guys live around here? Said the brunette. Ovdadinja Broadway 44 ulici, I said, giving our address at Broadway and 44th Street. Oh, we live in the West Village, the blonde answered, in English again. She was probably just showing off how Americanized she was, but I felt rejected, as if she didn't trust me enough to share our mother tongue. Flirting in Bosnian would have been more intimate, offering a chance to create a bond from our common ground. After all, the Serbs did come close to wiping us off the planet. Since we weren't offering to buy them drinks or dance or take them home, the girls gave up on us soon. Eldon called 3 male Bosnian buddies, who met us at Marshall's for a nightcap. I'd idolized my only sibling growing up, but he was 6 grades ahead of me in school, and he treated me like an annoying little kid, as though he felt he was too old to be my friend. During our years in Connecticut, we'd shoot hoops at the basketball courts. Taller and stronger, he would always win. It pissed me off. I was a bad sport and would hit him in the ribs with my elbow or step on his foot when he blocked my shots. Still, I'd missed him sorely when he left for college, so I relished finally getting to be his sidekick and joining his posse. It gave me the feeling of hanging out with the homeboys I never had as a teenager. We shared stuffed cabbage while listening to dirty theater, Croatia's Coldplay. My usual anxious energy was soothed by the guitar solos of Miki, a 40-year-old Serb Croat string bean we knew from the reception desk at Gigi's hair salon. As both the featured musician and the DJ controlling the mood of the room, Miki was the man. During his break, he had a bex with us, making us feel like we owned the place. Miki was from Mostar, a town ravaged in the war, the Stalingrad of Bosnia. We had history together. Eldon and I usually kept our background quiet unless we were asked specifics. Our reticence had become second nature after we were almost slaughtered for our name and religion. But suddenly at Marshall's, we felt respected and important again because of who we were and where we were from. I was psyched to return the next weekend. This time I dressed nicer, choosing slim-cut black jeans and a hunter green cashmere sweater. At the lounge, I drank 6 Jameson whiskeys and got what my college pals called drizzed. Danced to trance and world techno with some hip olive-skinned girls Eldon and I had met standing around the bar. The tunes reminded me of the pop tapes Eldon and I used to like in Birchco, which fascinated my mother. She listened to them on a cassette player, singing along when she trimmed her houseplants because, she said, greenery demands music and constant attention. She had a green thumb. Her friends would bring her their ailing flora that needed healing. The first sacrifice of the war was her flowers. We kept our shades closed to avoid being sprayed with bullets. Without sunlight, her cactus and hibiscus withered. During the fighting, patriotic anthems took over the radio. When we had batteries to listen, to avoid any trouble, she turned the music off. She had to watch, mute, while her plants died one by one. But it was more than familiar melodies that lured me back to Marshall's. I hadn't slept or eaten much since Nicole, the Manhattan girlfriend I had adored, had left me 6 weeks before. We'd been together 2 years. She was a slim, dark-haired Latina beauty from an immigrant family, bilingual and hardworking like I was, the only woman I'd ever invited to spend the holidays with me, Eldon, and Dad. I wasn't ready to date anyone else, but it didn't hurt to see the flocks of beautiful ladies in high heels walk by, with their sexy Serbian accents, long silky hair, lovely faces painted with lip gloss and eyeliner. I was 12 when my family was forced into exile, so I'd never kissed a girl from home. I'd never danced to Bosnian music at a nightclub before. I'd never walked into a bar and ordered a beer in my own tongue. All the normal teenage highlights were postponed and experienced late, in a different language, as though through a foreigner's eye. At Marshall's, I felt like I was traveling back in time to a life I never got to live, but desperately wanted to reclaim. Still, there were limits. After the bloody wars in the Balkans in the early 1990s, it would have been taboo to date, much less marry, a Serb. Eldon flirted with Snjonja, a hot bartender who'd come to New York on a short-term tourist visa. She played along, but I told him she just wanted bigger tips to take home to Serbia with her. He insisted he was onto her ruse. Still, I worried about Eldon, who, like me, worked long hours as a physical therapist. I'd nicknamed him Romeo since he'd fall for a pretty face much faster and harder than I would. I was still inconsolable after my breakup. Nicole was the only girl I'd ever told I loved. Despite Eldon's dire predictions that our old Eastern European cultural conflicts would spill over here, Marshall's remained altercation-free. We became regulars. The bouncer stopped asking to check our ID and greeted us with a double handshake. Gigi would wave, the bartender knew our drinks, the waitresses rushed our food. One summer evening in June 2010, I sensed something was different the moment I walked in. The staff of enticing young Serbian women had evidently brought their guy friends to the lounge, in droves. Instead of the female Serb voices that were so melodious to my ear, we were surrounded by the buzz of deeper, more guttural accents that I found disturbing. The new crowd was the same age as the armed soldiers who'd threatened to kill us back in Brčko. I hadn't heard speech like this since the war. Their talk, filled with bre, the equivalent of the Canadian A. It was jarring, yanking me back to 1992. You have an hour to leave or be killed, my beloved Serb karate coach Peros had told my father. Peros' men soon took Eldon and Dad to a concentration camp infamous for rape, torture, and mass murder. Even 2 decades later, the memory of seeing them taken away made my face tingle from fear. Hot blood coursed through my arms and legs, my heart pounding against my chest as if trying to escape. Eldon must have felt the Serb presence at Marshall's that night too, because he muttered, "Poor Tito must be turning in his casket," pointing to the granite bust of Marshall Tito's head on the highest bar shelf. Bright lights flared beneath each side of Tito's face, as if it were in a permanent spotlight. Tito was the moderate communist dictator who'd united all of my country's historically combative sects for 35 years. I was born in 1980, the year Toto died. At school, I had diligently pledged in front of my classmates and my favorite teacher, Milutin, to respect my parents, honor my homeland, and spread the unity for which Tito fought. Then Slobodan Milosevic came to power in 1989 and mobilized Serb nationalists in a deranged campaign to wipe Muslims out for the sake of Greater Serbia, the way Hitler had envisioned an Aryan race. But in the first months of warfare, I was crossing an intersection in Brčko after buying a loaf of rye bread, terrified of being struck by an errant bullet. I bumped into Milutin in full Serb uniform. I called, "Hey, teacher!" He knocked the bag out of my hand. Holding me by my left sideburn, he shoved his rifle barrel against the back of my head. I would have been dead right then and there if his gun hadn't jammed. Running away, I turned to catch him waving a 3-finger salute, the symbol of Serbian separatism made by extending the thumb, index, and middle fingers of the right hand, like a peace sign with an added thumb. It was based on the way Serbs performed the sign of the cross, the 3 fingers representing the Trinity. I never told anybody what my teacher did. I was too stunned to learn that the people we grew up with wanted us dead. At the lounge that night, I noticed that a group of Serb men stopped singing and dancing when Miki played the Sarajevo where it once was. A dividing line was drawn. Weeks later, We were upset to learn that the owners had fired Miki and given his DJ job to a Serb. Allegedly, Miki wasn't bringing in enough customers. Again, I felt like we were unwanted refugees being replaced, but I wasn't going to hide my identity this time. That Saturday night, I showed up in a sleeveless shirt to flaunt my tats. My right shoulder showed the constellation Sagittarius. On my left bicep was the historical Bosnian flag, with its blue coat of arms, yellow lilies, and white sword. A pal from our old country looked impressed and said, "Hey man, that's some sick ink." But the Serbian patrons eyed my blue shield suspiciously, as I'd expected. Over the next year, we continued to hang out at Marshall's, but the vibe slowly soured. Bosnian, Croatians, Montenegrins, and Serbians started sitting only with each other in separate corners. I watched helplessly as my cherished hangout balkanized before my eyes. One evening, I was dismayed when my stuffed cabbage came with bacon, strictly taboo, even for a secular Muslim like me. My mother had never cooked pork. "It's a filthy animal that rolls in its own dung," my father said. As I stared down at the greasy strip, my first thought was that someone in the kitchen was making a statement. But I learned the cook was an Orthodox Serb, so perhaps they now preferred serving meals with bacon. I removed the offending slice and put it on the bread plate filled with olive pits. Later, I learned that Gigi was just catering to the influx of Serbs who had recently stepped off the plane. Eldon and I were annoyed that making extra bucks was more important to Gigi than not alienating his own tribe. The new DJ spun trumpet-heavy turbo folk Serbian songs. Once again, I was becoming a minority on my own turf. I felt the way I had at 12 when my karate teammates, Dalibor and Dalibor, demanded that I return all the He-Man trading cards we'd collected together. When we'd venture outdoors between rounds of fighting, my one-time friends stopped picking me for their mini soccer games. They wouldn't even touch my black and white soccer ball, the lucky orb they once refused to play without. I'd have to watch the game behind a shade in my living room until they scattered at the sound of nearby explosions and gunshots. When the new DJ at Marshall's spun pop singer Sheikha's Last Supper, we'd had enough and stormed out. She was Serbia's Madonna in her Bad Girl stage, but Madonna had never been in and out of jail for money laundering, possession of illegal weapons, and making death threats. Sheikha's modern folk pop dance music was laden with ethnographic hints that made my Bosniak skin crawl. I'd despised her since I read in the Belgrade News that she had praised her husband, Arkan, a career international war criminal. He ran a paramilitary unit, Arkan's Tigers, that had raped and murdered Catholics and Muslims. Of course he would play this crap, I muttered, looking over at the DJ booth. After Arkan was assassinated in 2000, before he could stand trial, Sheikha had dedicated many of her songs to him. "She was married to an animal," Eldon told his friend Edmir. "Their heroes never saw the front lines. They only murdered the elderly and unarmed," I added. "You should see how many men his unit lost in our town," Eldon said. "They only attacked the vulnerable in large numbers. When they faced danger alone, they ran away," I said. I caught the bartender's eye to give us another round. Not long after that night, my neighbor texted me, "Don't go to Marshall's for a while." The word was that the Montenegrins were planning to trash the bar. They were furious when a young customer waved the same three-finger salute while Sheikha's song played. In my view, it was like giving the Heil Hitler sign to a Jewish Auschwitz survivor. But those young Serbian punks were showing their pride to the wrong crowd. I was no longer a powerless little kid in Birchko. My college buddies in America argued that everyone was free to express their beliefs without consequences. but they had not been the victims of an ethnic cleansing campaign by vicious racists who were barely punished. They were not obsessively following the news of the International Criminal Tribunal about the former Yugoslavia, led by a United Nations court of law, like my brother and I were. They didn't know that almost 20 years later the Serbs responsible for mass murder had yet to be prosecuted, or that while in prison, an ultranationalist monster named Vojislav Šešelj was able to publish his own version of Mein Kampf, inanely arguing that Serbia had legitimately waged war against us as self-defense to save Europe from an Islamic invasion. They didn't understand that the longer the trials went on, the more likely those responsible for the atrocities against my people would die in country club prisons where they had access to TV, movies, music, and the internet, and then to be honored with a hero's funeral in Serbia, like the reception given Slobodan Milosevic when he died in 2006. They didn't realize that in ex-Yugoslav social setting, one idiotic salute could provoke a nonviolent man whose entire life had been ripped away from him because of his religion. Even after being warned, I couldn't stay away from marshals. The illusion of recapturing some part of my childhood drew me back. In the winter of 2011, I persuaded my brother to give it a last chance. I wanted to bask in my Balkan haven a little longer. But this time, walking into the Queen's Lounge one night in February, we immediately saw that we were the only Bosniaks in the place. Miki was long gone. The murals and Tito's statues reminded us that the make-believe brotherhood he'd created had died with him 31 years ago. Love Lives, one of Sheikha's songs dedicated to Arkan, assaulted my ears. I turned to see a Serbian man in his 20s, waving the three-finger salute to his buddies. Fueled by alcohol and testosterone, I felt years of buried rage resurfacing. Heat rose from my chest to my pounding head. I flashed back to the first of 6 times my family tried to escape Bosnia, when we were stopped at a checkpoint in Brčko and kicked off a bus. I was 11, sweating under 3 layers of shirts and a jacket. We could each only carry 1 suitcase, so we wore extra clothes on our backs. A guerrilla fighter in a black uniform, a black hat, and a long beard cocked his gun and ordered us to march forward. Another armed man's face turned red as he stared into my father's eyes, then glanced down at his combat boots and said in a shamed mumble, "I'm sorry, I can't do anything, Keka." He knew my father, called him by an endearment while leading him to his possible death. I heard the sound of a chamber loading as we walked away in silence. "Don't turn around," my father warned. The soldiers laughed. I thought it was all over then. I hated being too small to protect my family. I wished I could wake up the next day at 18 and take revenge as a soldier. As an adult, I'd never once used a gun or knife or my fist. I was afraid of what I might do, but now I didn't care if I was outnumbered. I finished my last sip of beer. I picked up the empty bottle, ready to break it on the table and use the jagged edge as a weapon. My brain told me to simmer down, not to do anything that could destroy the nice world I'd managed to rebuild here. Yet I felt like I was being disrespected in my own home. I crumbled the napkin into a ball and threw it from 20 feet away. It flew in a perfect arc, bounced off the top of the Serbian saluter's head, and landed in the middle of the table. I smirked. I used to stand on the banks of the river Sava, launching rocks that rippled across the water. "I'll never forget the time Kenan nailed the snake swimming in the river from 30 miles away," Dad had said proudly. Now the guys at the Serbs' table turned to look in my direction. I was no longer a scared 5-foot, 100-pound, 11-year-old kid. I was a muscular 6-foot man in my 3rd decade. I waved my index finger side to side. a silent warning that the saluter should keep his gesture to himself. My brother would fight alongside me. It would be 2 against 6, yet I felt no fear. They could not imagine how much rage I had pent up. I had no idea myself until that moment. Fortunately for us all, they stayed behind on their side, stifling their insults, but complaining to the bouncer. I walked over to one of the Bosniak owners. "You'd sell your mother for a few extra dinars," I said. 2 months later, on April 10th, 2011, while celebrating my brother's birthday on Steinway Street and 20th Avenue, we received a text that 4 Montenegrins had walked into Marshall's and caught the same 3-finger salute that I had. That night, bottles and stools were smashed across the room, shattering and striking innocent patrons. The fight escalated on the sidewalk outside. 4 young Serbs were injured. A 26-year-old was stabbed in the back, and a 21-year-old had his right forearm slashed. A 24-year-old Serb received a chest gash, and a 27-year-old male was hit with a bottle. Each was treated and released from the hospital. Police were searching for the 4 Montenegrins, who the New York Post referred to as thugs. I calculated that the youngest victim, at 21, was a 2-year-old toddler when the war began. His cluelessness about that time period and his misguided arrogance had given him a permanent scar. Marshall's closed on April 18th, 2011. I didn't need a haircut, but scheduled an appointment at Gigi's salon anyway, dying to hear what really happened. Gigi was in denial that the conflict had been triggered by nationalistic provocation. Christina, the adorable Serbian brunette who washed my hair, had been working as a bartender that night. I gave her a kiss on the cheek as I walked in. She was still in distress that her friends had been stabbed. She recalled hiding under the bar as the bottles and chairs started flying. "They came to start trouble for no reason," Christina insisted. I could have shared my own opinion about the idiots who showed the 3-finger salute, but I had learned over the years that there was no point. There was always several sides to a story, but only one truth. I sat in my Croatian hairdresser's, Monica's chair, and asked, "Did you hear?" "Yes, what did you expect?" she replied. The last time I walked by Marshall's, I was sad to see it had turned into Portalia, an Italian restaurant serving homemade pasta. It had been a worthy effort by Gigi, but Bosniaks like me, who lost our comrades, our home, and our country, could not be easily placated with pre-war pop music, sexy Balkan miniskirts, and a foreign menu. Though the danger was years behind us, the memories were never far away. Having a drink with Eldon at DeWine was a month later, we spied the statue of Marshal Tito hiding on a high shelf behind a bottle of Bosnian moonshine. "You know, Dad asked if I thought we should visit Birchko," my brother said. I thought we all swore we'd never go back there," I said, alarmed at the thought. "Damn straight we won't, though if we did, nobody could hurt us this time," Eldon said. He put his hand on my shoulder to let me know that in case we ever did decide to return, he would be protecting me from our old enemies. That wasn't my concern at all. Who, I wondered, would protect me from myself?